Thank you. Is this on? Yeah. Morning, everyone. So the first piece of business is we'll vote on the draft February 12th, 2019 board minutes. Board members have had a chance to review those minutes, and they've been posted on our website. Is there a motion to approve? Is there a second? Any questions, comments, changes, additions, deletions? No? Thank you. All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Thank you very much. The motion carries. I just want to bring you up to date now on the current status of the issue we had last month on the sharing of patient information regarding health and injury. Prior to the February 2019 public meeting, Law Department decided that the board's oversight over CHS's sharing of patients' injury information with the Department of Correction was no longer required in certain instances. That decision was based on Corp Counsel's finding that the board's minimum standards should be interpreted differently than had been interpreted for the past 5 years. Corp Counsel wrote a legal opinion which found that the long-standing variance was unnecessary in injuries stemming from uses of force, then a secondary opinion that the specific diagnoses of all injuries sustained while in DOC custody are fundamentally necessary to any investigation of incidents and therefore not subject to the board's minimum standards. At last month's board meeting, the board unanimously passed a resolution declaring that the board strongly disagreed with Corp Counsel's opinion, that minimum standards remain in effect, and that CHS must seek a variance to continue any sharing of patient diagnoses. And third, the board has legal authority to impose sanctions, to impose conditions on the variance. Because CHS did not seek a variance renewal, that variance expired on February 12, 2019. As CHS has still not sought a variance renewal, the board is prepared to enter rulemaking to enforce the minimum standards and to implement additional rules to improve the injury response and prevention process, which we found to be dangerously flawed in our January 2019 report on serious injuries. We've submitted a proposed rule to the Law Department and Mayor's Office of Operations for certification and to the DOC and CHS for their feedback on any operational impact. Once certified, we will publish the proposed rule on our website in the city record and circulate it to interested parties. The board plans to vote on the proposed rule on April 23rd of this year at the end of our special hearing. This will officially begin the CAPA process, which includes a public hearing and the acceptance of public comment for at least 30 days. We look forward to a productive conversations on this topic with all stakeholders. Thank you. Martha?
So we'll move on to the next topic. Sorry, this is a new. Do you want to discuss?
Oh, yeah.
I just want to say that that the board takes this extremely seriously, and this is not about a defect in our rule, although there is a defect in our rule, which will be remedied. It is about an extremely critical issue of openness and investigation of injuries. And it is not a coincidence that the City of New York, through the Department of Correction and the Health and Hospitals Corporation, New York Health and Hospitals and the Law Department, in response to our report saying that investigations were not taking place, that they have created this unnecessary problem which obscures and attempts to obscure the fact that so many serious injuries were not being fully investigated. And I was very disappointed that the response of the city was just to challenge our rule and particularly from Health and Hospitals, not to say we believe that reporting, investigation, and prevention of injuries is among the most important things that we do. We have to treat asthma, we have to treat HIV infection, we have to identify sexual assault, but preventing injuries through identifying them and investigating them is critical, and there was not a peep out of Health and Hospitals at the last meeting, and nor from the Department of Corrections. So I hope that going forward, this will get resolved. But if the City of New York does not put substantial effort into identifying, investigating, and taking action following serious injuries, there will be a lot of serious injuries, and there will be continued deaths as there have been in the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen. Any other comment from board level? Yep. Okay, thank you.
So on to the next topic. According to the last mayor's management report, about 14% of people in New York City jails have a serious mental health diagnosis. That's close to 1,300 people at any given time. 43% of people in custody have used mental health services at least 3 times during their incarceration. These percentages have increased slightly over the last 5 years. These numbers suggest that there are a range of mental health needs, including many that are very serious in the jails, and more fundamentally, that there are too many people with mental illness in the jails, an issue that many city agencies have been trying to address. To respond to these mental health needs inside of jail, CHS and DOC have established various mental health housing units, mental observation units, PACE, CAPS, RHU, as well as the psychiatric wards at Bellevue and Elmhurst hospitals. So today we've asked DOC and CHS to brief us on the spectrum of mental health housing and their current operations. Thank you.
Good morning. Good morning.
Hi.
We have, there we go, a slide deck with a microphone. Good morning. My name is Elizabeth Ford. I'm the Chief of Psychiatry for Correctional Health Services. Thank you very much for putting this on the agenda. We at CHS and definitely at DOC also feel like the care and treatment of individuals with all mental illness, including those with serious mental illness, is important, and the overrepresentation of them in the jails in New York City and throughout the country is a crisis, in my opinion. So thank you very much for giving us this opportunity. I'm going to go through a description of the mental health service and specific housing units and try to address some of the questions that the board has raised to us. So as Ms. King mentioned, the mental health service is a large proportion of individuals who are currently detained in the jail system. This was as of a couple of days ago. We have about 3,700 patients who have an M, and the M is a classification related to a lawsuit, but essentially describes individuals who at any time during their incarceration were treated for some kind of mental health issue, and that's about 43% of the jail at any time. We currently have about 1,100 individuals who are diagnosed with serious mental illness, and that definition includes for us people with schizophrenia spectrum disorders, people with bipolar spectrum disorders, which includes bipolar 1 and 2, as well as a few other diagnoses, depressive disorders, and we have added PTSD to our definition of serious mental illness, although it is not commonly considered to be an SMI in jails. About 31% of the mental health service has serious mental illness, and that's about 16% of the jail. Women are overrepresented in this population. As you can see on the slides, that's a rough breakdown of individuals who have serious mental illness and where they fall. About 3/4 of the patients with serious mental illness in the jail are housed in specialized mental health housing units, which I'll describe later. And about 97% of people in those housing areas have serious mental illness. People with serious mental illness in New York City are excluded from all restrictive housing. And that's a very important distinction with our jail. So just to give you a sense about the volume and the churn, 37% of intakes, of medical intakes are referred to mental health upon admission to the jail, and you can see the numbers up there. Broken down, it's about 60% of women are referred, and roughly 30 to 34% of men are referred. We also have a fair number of individuals who are admitted into the jail who have documented intellectual or developmental disability, So about 2% of intakes who come in have previous or current involvement with the Office of Persons with Developmental Disability. This is definitely an underestimate of the individuals coming in, because to get services with OPWDD, you have to have gone through a fairly significant assessment process. So we're fairly confident that over 1,000 people per year are being admitted to the jail who have intellectual and developmental disability. Okay, so once you come into the jail, everyone gets a medical intake, and that's within the first 24 hours. And then from that medical intake, individuals are referred for mental health or not, based on that screen. And if they are referred to mental health, they're seen at least within 3 days. About 10 to 15% of new admissions are seen within 24 hours because of the intensity and severity of their needs. And then within the first couple of weeks, everybody who's been referred to the service, regardless of their housing, has had a comprehensive treatment plan and a reentry plan that's started, because as you know, in jails, we are frequently unaware of when someone's being discharged. And so we try to do as much reentry and social work planning up front to prepare for the unexpected releases. And you can see from the, well, hopefully you can see from this slide that in addition to medical intake, we have a large number of referrals that come from the Department of Correction, from patients themselves through sick call, from 311 calls, advocates, family, community providers. And so we field all of those referrals. The red circle indicates the M population. So once you've passed through the first couple hurdles, then within a couple of weeks, you're on the mental health service. In addition to formal treatment for mental illness and mental disorders, we do have a number of services for young adults in the jails that are screening services for individuals who are not formally in mental health treatment, because the young adult population is so vulnerable in the jail, and the individuals who come into the jail are already at predisposed risk to certain illnesses. We will screen every 18 to 21-year-old for PTSD symptoms, substance use disorder, psychopathology, and intellectual and developmental delay. So once someone is assessed by our service, an initial determination is made about where it is conceivably safe for them to be housed. And so this takes you through the 4 levels of care that are available to our patients. The first, general population clinics. So those are, we have, in all of the jails, we have the equivalent of an outpatient clinic in the jail. So these are for individuals who can remain in housing areas with the general population, and then they come to the clinics for their appointments on a regular basis, and are seen as one would in an outpatient setting. They do require production to be brought to the clinics, but these are voluntary appointments. And then if somebody has either serious mental illness and or an illness or a condition for which really additional care and support is needed and that we cannot provide in a GP setting, they will get referred to one of our 17 mental observation units called MOs. We have 540 beds on 17 units throughout 5 jails. We have a couple dedicated for women, a couple dedicated for young adults. We have an MO for a PACE unit, for people who are sentenced. So on those units, we offer the services, the clinical services, all on the units. So the patients do not have to be produced to a clinic. We provide group therapy and social work and activity therapy programming, individual psychotherapy, medication management, and a number of other services. I'll describe those a little bit later. If an MO level of care is not enough for the individual's intensity of illness, then they can be placed on one of our we have 6 PACE units, which I will describe later. And PACE and CAPS are a much more intense version of a mental health unit, and those have been modeled after inpatient psychiatric units. And then if the level of care is in fact even higher than that that's needed, then we have access to hospital beds within the General Hospital at Bellevue for the men and Elmhurst for the women. And there are 68 certified male beds at Bellevue and 14 at Elmhurst. Okay, so since, here's a little bit more about the MO units. Since CHS transitioned to Health and Hospitals, which was in early 2016, the way the mental observation units have functioned has changed fairly dramatically. We have implemented a supervisory structure for all staff. And some of these principles may seem fairly self-evident for healthcare, but jails are far behind the curve in terms of offering the standard of community care, and so we are trying very hard in our system to raise that bar. Every clinical staff member on the mental health service now has a supervisor with whom they can discuss difficult cases, with whom they can conference with other disciplines, and with whom they can vent and talk about the struggles and frustrations of working in a jail setting, which affect everybody. We have greatly expanded the group programming. So while there used to be perhaps one group every couple of weeks on the mental health units, now there are generally at least one per day on those units. We have added a new kind of mental health worker to those units called court liaisons, which help liaise between the treatment teams, the clinical staff, and the legal teams, with consent, of course, to try to help expedite, if possible, the individual through the criminal justice system, because we are certainly in line with DOC in terms of trying to minimize the impact of jail on these individuals. We have added crisis intervention teams, which you'll hear about a little bit later. Those are embedded on the mental observation units and are joint CHS and DOC teams that respond to escalating situations between patients on the units in order to avoid injury and uses of force. I think one of the most critical changes that have happened on the unit are dedicated treatment teams, which means that each patient on these units has their own dedicated set of individuals, and I'll describe who they are, who work together and work collaboratively. The patient is at the center of that team and very involved, and that allows for continuity of care, which is critically important. So in jail psychiatry, oftentimes the relationship with the patient is the actual treatment. And that's very important to consider in this setting, which is sometimes different than the community. These treatment teams have integrated social work and substance use in their care, which is a significant difference from prior to CHS. We are trying to build these treatment teams in the GP clinics as well. It's a lot more difficult because the patients are spread out all over, and they do need to be brought to the clinic for their appointments. And it can be difficult when there isn't continuity of care to have that team framework in place. But we are trying to replicate that in the GP clinics as well. So here's a little schematic. I hope I can explain it about the treatment team concept. So prior to CHS, and in fact only until a few years ago, generally you have patients on MO units, and the individual providers, so let's say the psychiatrist and the social worker and the therapist, would go to the units on their designated days, and they would run their list of patients in terms of who needed what kind of thing done that day. They were very rarely seeing the same patient, and they were very rarely talking to each other. And so now what we've implemented is a system where, as you can see, the whole team is working together, there's continuity of care, there's community building on the units, and there's a lot more sharing of information, which helps improve the quality of care. In 2013, the Clinical Alternative to Punitive Segregation Units, or CAPS, were introduced, and they are designed for patients who are diagnosed with serious mental illness and who have violated jail rules and otherwise would be punished with solitary confinement or punitive segregation. Following the success of CAPS, we developed the Program for Accelerating Clinical Effectiveness, a lot of acronyms, but those are PACE units, and those are for patients with serious mental illness who have not infracted. And so the idea, we had really had some good success with the CAPS unit and did not want to reserve that only for people who had infractions. And so we've developed a very robust program for individuals with serious mental illness, and I'll show you some data on that shortly. So we received initial funding for 4 PACE units, and then we have since requested and received money and approval to triple that number to 12 units, and we are expected to open those by 2020. We have 6 units open now, and we have 6 more to go, and we definitely need all 6 of those. all 12 of them, certainly. So these are the 6 that exist right at the moment. One of the hallmarks of these units is that they each are designated for a subpopulation of people with serious mental illness. The first one that opened was designed specifically for individuals returning from Bellevue Hospital. I came from Bellevue Hospital before coming to the jails and was very familiar with the recycling phenomenon of patients becoming worse in the jail, going to the hospital, getting stabilized, going back to the jail, and within days, destabilizing and having to go back to the hospital. And for every hospitalization that an individual with serious mental illness has, their prognosis long-term diminishes significantly. And so we really want to make sure that we are reducing the hospitalizations. So that unit was designed specifically with that in mind. We have an acute care unit that is, instead of a step down from the hospital, you could think of as a step up. So these are for individuals who may not be hospital eligible at the moment, but for whom we are very concerned maybe. So people who are on specific kinds of medication or with specific illnesses that are at high risk for decompensation. So that we have the acute care unit, which is in GRVC. We have a unit specifically for individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities. They have very different needs than individuals with serious mental illness, and we wanted to be cognizant of that. We have another hospital return unit for people coming back from the state who have just been restored after a competence finding or not fit finding. So we would like to reduce that frequent flyer recycling with the state hospitals as well. We have a unit for the women that opened in 2017, and our most recent unit that opened is for city-sentenced men at EMTC. And because everyone there has been sentenced on a misdemeanor, and will be returning to the community, we have an intense focus there on trying to solidify reentry plans for that population. And then we have 6 more that we are eager to get in motion. We definitely need another hospital return unit from Bellevue. We definitely need another one from the state and another acute. We have a lot more patients that could benefit from these PACE units. The PACE units, each, depending on the jail, they look slightly different, but they're all based on these design principles that you see up here. There's programming all day long, typically 3 groups a day. There are multidisciplinary staff, including nursing, social work, creative art therapy, psychology, counselors, and our equivalent of behavioral health techs. And they are embedded on the units. The offices are on the units. The staff stay there with the patients. The model has really benefited the patients, and I think, frankly, the staff in significant ways. Both the health staff and the DOC staff on these units are steady, which is critical, and they train together. So when we open each unit, there's a week-long intensive training with both DOC and CHS staff. And half of it, frankly, is getting to know each other and talking about biases and stigma and just ideas about people with mental illness. Once you can get past that collectively, it's much easier to take care of the patients. And the units are based on a positive behavioral management reward system. Okay, so here's a little bit of data. We've been collecting data on the male PACE units for much longer than, well, not much longer, but a couple of years longer than the women in CAPS. So we have a little bit more to report for that group. But as you can see on the left column, the outcome metric are main points of interest for these units. So medication adherence, individuals taking their medication. We do not force medicate in the jail. The self-harm rate, and the 30-day rehospitalization rate. These rates are all per 1,000 person days. So if you look on the next column, the baseline, we compared our PACE patients to the MO patients in 2014, pre-PACE opening. And so you can see the goals that we had. And if you keep looking over across based on each PACE unit, if it's green, it means we have already met or exceeded the goal. We're heading in the right direction with all of them. The one note I would say is you might notice in the intellectual and developmental delay unit, the self-harm rate is a little bit of an outlier, a lot bit of an outlier. And unfortunately, with that population, sometimes self-soothing behaviors appear to be self-injurious. And so we have particular treatment and behavioral interventions for that population that we're working on. The women, we first started tracking data in March of 2017. So we established some baselines, and you can see for the first 9 months or so where we are with the women, heading in the right direction, certainly still room to grow. And then on the CAPS units, we just started tracking data in this robust kind of way as we do for the PACE units in calendar year 2018. So right now we've established the first year pretty much of tracking. We don't have baseline data for CAPS patients. The only reasonable comparison group would be individuals who would have been in Maui many years ago. And at this point, we don't have that kind of historical data to create a really robust baseline. So what we're going to do is try to improve from these numbers here. So in addition to individuals with serious mental illness and their treatment, I just wanted to also highlight the services that we have implemented for people who are found incompetent to stand trial, or those who are found not fit on 730 exams. We voluntarily assumed the management of the forensic court clinics in all 4 boroughs. Brooklyn provides for Staten Island as well. And so now CHS is responsible for the fitness to stand trial evaluations in the criminal courts in New York City. It's separate from the treatment service, so I want to make sure that that's clear. But we have been involved in the management. And that's allowed us to much better understand and track and then treat individuals who are in this system. So as of, I don't exactly know when that 121 is, but within the last week, we've had 121 individuals in the jail who were awaiting a 730 evaluation, and just under half of them were housed in MO units or PACE or CAPS units. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're waiting for a felony 730 evaluation, so it's mixed misdemeanor and felony. We have, since we took over the court clinic, we do have the ability to now track how long it takes to do certain things, and so you can see up here the average number of days from the 730 order that the judge issues to the completion of that order has dropped substantially. So there was a report a few years ago that noted it took about 43 days to complete a fitness to stand trial evaluation. As you can see, we've drastically reduced that in all 4 boroughs, particularly in Queens, where efforts started in the focus there. We have 159 individuals currently who have come back from the hospital after being restored on a 730 evaluation, and the vast majority of them are currently housed in MO, PACE, and CAPS units. And I just do want to give a shout out to OMH because the average time to transfer once somebody is found not fit from our jail up to the hospital is about 10 days. It used to be double that. And every day in jail for patients, I think, is counter-therapeutic in some ways, and so the more that we can reduce that, the better. And that's been a shared effort of OMH as well as our 730 teams. And I think, do I have bullets up there? Oh, yeah. So we have the PACE unit that's devoted to individuals returning to from the state hospital has been instrumental in the outcomes that you see here, as well as a novel approach, I don't think it's been done anywhere else in the country, of the equivalent of an ACT team, if you're familiar with ACT, in the jail that is responsible for every patient who comes back from the state hospital, whether they're on the PACE unit or not. So they have a caseload of patients, and they'll see them wherever they are in the jails and try to help expedite them through the system. I think these changes are working. We certainly hear positive feedback from the patients. We hear positive feedback from advocates and community members, and also from the Department of Correction. I think one of the largest things to evidence how good things are going is that we have not had a suicide on the mental health service in more than 3 years now in the jail, which I think may not have ever happened in the history of that jail. We have limited the need for medication over objection, so we are sending patients to the hospital much less frequently in order to get force medicated from a judge, in large part because this PACE unit model has allowed for greater team engagement for the patient. There's more tolerance for behaviors that may otherwise have been force medicated, and the patients are much more engaged. And I think that's a critical thing to recognize. Self-harm rates have also significantly dropped since January of 2015. And throughout all of this, we've been able to hire and retain a lot of professional and well-trained psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, as well as multiple other disciplines. But it is not a mystery that jail psychiatry is incredibly hard to recruit into. Psychiatrists generally do not want to work in these kinds of areas, and we have been able to create an environment, both a care environment and a learning environment for psychiatrists that makes New York City now actually a desirable place to work in terms of jail settings. So I am happy to take any questions. I think that's the last slide. Yep, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you very much.
Questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, thank you very much, Liz, Dr. Ford. I've been very impressed with the work that you and your team have done over the past number of years, and I think the PACE and CABS programs hopefully to be expanded more quickly. We're waiting. We don't want to hear about them coming anymore. We want to hear about their their funding and implementation. I have a question which came just why. I have a sense that the department believes, and I don't know actually what your service believes, that that there's something about women's mental health services and solitary confinement and infraction issues that are very closely linked. And for example, you have a much higher percentage of women are in the CAPS programs than men, dramatically higher, and you have very few women are in solitary confinement, which is great. And you also described a utilization of mental health services at intake dramatically higher for women than for men. It makes me think of studies that CHS performed a number of years ago, looking at differential access to mental health services based upon race and age. And I wondered what do you think the implications are of the number of women who you identify as requiring intensive mental health services at the beginning, and the department's approach to violence in women in a punitive or non-punitive way?
Well, I can certainly address the question about the higher utilization and need of women for mental health services in the jail. Well, actually, I should rephrase that. I can tell you that is a fact, and it is not just in New York City, but nationally, women who are arrested and incarcerated have higher mental health needs. It is, and whether, I guess I won't opine about why that is particularly, but it ends up that way. In addition, women in jail, and from my experience in the community, generally in the community, tend to be more engaged and access mental health care than men. And again, I don't know exactly why that is. But we have tried in Rosie's to honor that interest and need in the women and make sure that the services there meet their needs. It is also correct psychiatrically that violence generally is more of a warning sign of mental illness in women than it is in men. So fighting is more of a common occurrence in men as a result of the environment of the jail rather than of mental illness. As for the department's practices, I will defer to them on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Judge Hamill.
Yes, thank you so much for your presentation, and I concur with Bobby. I've been really, really impressed with the work that you've been doing in the jails, and tremendous improvement here for those that suffer from mental health disorders and serious mental illness. So thank you so much. I just have a couple of questions. In terms of when you're talking about the incarcerated persons that are placed in the PACE and the CAPS unit, as a result of their serious mental illness, do they remain in those units until they are transferred or discharged, or are they stepped down or out to different units?
It is an excellent question. The initial plan for all of our intensive PACE and CAPS units was that they would be transitional units. So individuals would come there at the time of their most need. We would be able to stabilize them and then step them down to MO units or GP even then out. What we have found is that because of the level of need for those individuals, they are unable to tolerate and be safe and be stable in any environment other than that. So that's a key reason, in fact, the most important reason that we need more of those units. But we did try. We tried to step them down, and within a couple weeks, it was evident that that wasn't working. So the average length of stay on most of those units is about 2 months, and that typically tracks with, the averages are difficult, right, because you have the short stays and the very long stays. But typically, people are discharged from the jail. From those units, they're discharged from the jail.
And then let me see if I can phrase this in a correct way. You know, we often hear from correction officers and others that there's so many people who are currently being housed in our jails that don't really belong there. That as a result of their serious mental illness, they really should be in some type of supportive housing or treatment programs, or perhaps even hospitals. Obviously, you care for the patients as they come in, but do you, based on your expertise and your experience now, working not only at Bellevue, but also at Rikers, have any suggestions for how New York City could perhaps better manage some of those that are incarcerated at Rikers that really don't belong there and can't be well managed? Or managed as well, maybe treated. You're obviously managing them very well under very difficult circumstances, but better managed in light of their needs.
Yeah, I think it's, I mean, in an ideal world, a job like mine would not exist because we would not have people with serious mental illness who are incarcerated. I think that there's a ways to go in the community with respect to not just how to care for our patients when they leave the jail, but to prevent them coming in. And the areas that I think that need the most focus are particularly around socioeconomic issues. So housing and education and employment and support. Certainly treatment considerations are important, but people are rarely arrested because they are not taking care of their mental health needs directly. It's a quality of life issue, or it's something that's related to an inability to function safely out in the community. I think in New York City, and this is, I think, largely true for the country, the community is not yet fully able to take care of individuals who have criminal justice histories, and mental health certainly has a ways to go in terms of training their providers about how to feel comfortable talking to a person who has been arrested or who has spent time in custody, being able to talk with them in an empathic way about trauma and the experiences they've had, and be able to support them and react to them not from a sense of fear, but from a sense of understanding and curiosity. And that forms the treatment relationship. And when you have a good treatment relationship, generally, other things will flow from that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Natalie?
Thank you, Dr. Ford. This presentation is great. Thank you for the work that you're doing. I love the way you framed it, is that you want to elevate the standards of care in the jail like the standards of care in the community. I think that's so critically important. But can you talk about the mental health services that's being provided to people in ESH, and talk about what's the role that correctional help is playing in the process of determining the off-ramp for people who are being adjudicated for punitive settings. So, like, how is CHS working in that particular respect?
Okay.
What work is being done with EHS?
Okay. You'll interrupt me if I'm not getting to all of the pieces of your question, but so starting with punitive segregation, every individual who is on the mental health service who has been served with an infraction by the Department of Correction is reviewed by the mental health service. If they are found to have serious mental illness, they are outright excluded from any kind of restrictive housing, which includes ESH, it includes TRU, secure, those are RHU, those kinds of things. And we will slot that person for CAPS. So that CAPS was designed specifically for the individuals with serious mental illness. And then we provide all the services that we mentioned on the CAPS unit. With respect to ESH, we provide mental health services as needed for the individuals there, and our clinicians will go and see the patients on an individual basis. There's an interview room just outside the unit that they can come to, or they can be brought to the clinic. We do screen everybody who is designated for a restrictive housing area for serious mental illness and make sure that they're not there. There's also surveillance, so there's rounding on the SEG units to make sure that somebody is not getting worse. If that does happen, we'll communicate with the Department of Correction to make sure that they're pulled out. Mm-hmm.
Thank you for your presentation, Dr. Ford. I would like to hear you speak a little bit more to the services provided to the IDD population, specifically in the specialized units, with a particular focus on efforts to meet the needs they present there, and also efforts to address the needs of the substantial population clearly living outside of the specialized units.
Okay, so for the individuals who we identify as having intellectual or developmental disability, if they are fairly impaired, they will be on the PACE unit. The different treatment model there as opposed to the other units is that medication is not as strongly emphasized. There is much more structure and support. So generally the idea throughout the day on that unit is to make sure the patients know where they need to go or where they want to go, are aware of their environment, have somebody that they can go to. If they are feeling overwhelmed or anxious, there's a safe space where they can sort of safely go to be by themselves. It's much more about the milieu and the environment than it is about treating a particular illness, obviously. We also work very closely with OPWDD for that population. And there's a lot of interface with the criminal justice system as much as we're able with consents to try to expedite them out of the unit. We have developed a very, very strong assessment service for the young adults with respect to this. So there is a lot of surveillance for people who are not on that PACE unit to identify this kind of issue. We are working to expand it for the adults. So we have an expert in two psychologist experts in psychological assessment with particular emphasis on this focus, and we have a couple of clinicians who can do the testing, and we're aiming to hire a few more. So we try to identify them, but it's a vexing problem for this jail, and I think for many jails.
Yes, two more questions that I have. Could you comment on about 25% of the people you asked to be seen are not produced by DOC, according to the report that we have in our book today. Could you comment on what you understand to be the reasons for that, and what your service is doing with DOC to improve that? And second, could you, in a separate clinical mode, can you discuss the treatment of ADHD on Rikers Island and at Horizon, the clinical treatment?
Mm-hmm. Yes, sorry, one. So so production and in the general population clinics for mental health. I would start by saying that generally mental health clinics everywhere, jail or otherwise, struggle with missed appointments. So the no-show rate in community settings is between 12 and 60%.
This is not brought. These are people who are not refusing. They're not being brought. So it's
right. So in the community, the no-show rate is very high. for mental health issues, and much higher with individuals who are of racial and ethnic minorities. Our jail population is obviously the flip of that. So we have in our population, we have patients who do not want to come to appointments, certainly, and that likely relates to the same issues that relate in the community. So there are issues around stigma, perhaps lack of insight. A big problem that we face is the continuity of care challenge. So people may not want to come, they actually tell us they don't want to come to our appointments if they know they're not going to see the same person each time. A therapeutic relationship doesn't evolve without continued time. And we do struggle with some of the production issues maintaining continuity of care. So there are refusals that are some part of that. I defer to the Department of Correction about some of the challenges that they may face bringing patients to the clinic. But it is definitely the case that we will not be able to implement treatment teams, and we will not be able to improve care in those clinics unless we're able to see the patients more regularly. Oh, there was ADHD. We do provide treatment for ADHD in the jails and at Horizon. Bellevue provides the care at Horizon. And the care is generally what is done in the community. So if someone needs a stimulant, for example, Ritalin or Concerta, we will prescribe that. That has been a policy shift since the former administration of the Jail Health Service, with the acknowledgement that actually ADHD is one of the only mental health diagnoses for which medication is by far the standard of care. And so we didn't want to deprive patients of that just because of concerns about diversion and risk, although we do have to monitor for that.
I'm very glad to hear that. I think that was an important change in the clinical practice.
Joe John.
We're so lucky we have you and your presentation. We have a very short agenda, so we get to ask you a lot of questions that we've all been curious about. What are currently the criteria for transfer to Bellevue? I recall when you were managing the forensic unit, and long before all these improvements, there were a lot of concerns by correction officers that incarcerated persons were not being transferred timely and appropriately. So it would be helpful to know what are the current criteria?
Yeah, so, so the criteria, I don't know if the criteria for transfer have shifted that dramatically. But we have many more well-trained supervisory staff who are able to identify those criteria faster and refer people to the hospital. But generally, we go by civil commitment criteria, which in New York State means reasonable probability that someone has a mental illness and that they are dangerous in some way as a result of that mental illness. And danger is interpreted very broadly, but you can think of two big categories: danger to self and danger to others. We also include in that category not taking care of oneself, not eating, for example, withdrawing significantly. So if anybody who has, anyone is demonstrating both a mental illness and some level of danger, then we will refer them to the hospital. The hospital is required to do an independent evaluation of the person to see if they meet that same criteria and if they agree that hospitalization is indicated for the person. And so that determination is made at the hospital. There has been, because of fiscal challenges that Health and Hospitals has faced in the last year or two, there has been a reduction in available beds for us at Bellevue Hospital. It hasn't affected Elmhurst in the same way. And so in the past couple of years, we have had access to about half of the number of beds that we had about 5 or 6 years ago. However, Health and Hospitals has acknowledged that is a significant concern and is actively working to staff up those units so that they can open up the beds again.
Anyone else? Thank you, Dr.
You're welcome.
Great, and thank you for the progress. Can we hear from the department now?
Good morning. I think Dr. Ford summarized everything very nicely. I'm happy to take any additional questions.
Sure. I have some questions for, I guess, both of you together. You can come up, I guess, if you need to. Maybe we could start off by talking about an issue that's come up over the past year, certainly at AMKC, which was the staffing ratios in the MO units, and also the decisions and the collaboration between DOC and CHS in terms of movement of patients between the mental observation units and trying to improve that process. I believe some changes were made on staffing ratios, adding officers to the MO units, and also changing the process and documenting that process of moving people. If both or whoever needs to speak to this could describe what's changed and what's been the impact.
I'm going to let Deb Gallagher talk about the process with movement and the collaboration between clinical health services and security.
And the staffing ratios, the impact of that, because I'm interested in knowing whether or not you've seen something different in AMKC MO units versus other facilities and whether or not that needs to change in other facilities as well.
Okay, the first question about the movement. One thing we did, there's two types of moves. There's the internal moves within the facility and to different facilities. We had a bigger problem where guys were being moved to other facilities. You had this whole treatment team over here who's moved. So it was about, don't hold me to this, I want to say a year ago, Dr. Ford will remember, we created bed boarding, which is something they do in a hospital, where it gets run through CHS. Guys are just not arbitrarily going to be transferred. We look at vacancies. It's what they do in the hospital. If there's vacancies on the 5th floor, they'll move the guys up there and spread them out. So CHS took a big role in the transfer of the guys from one unit to one jail to the other. Internally in AMKC, the additional staff was because more clinical care was coming in. They were going to run more groups in the back. So it wasn't about security. They were going to, you're kind of copying the PACE model. In PACE and CAPS, you have the one officer will do the standard role of a correction officer, the count and that stuff. The other one is to work with the treatment team, to help out with the groups, running the groups, getting the guys to take medication. So I know in 5 and 7 in the back of the jail, AMKC created day room officers, group officers, what we called them in PACE. I don't know the results of it. I mean, if it copies PACE and CAPS, it should get better, because it's really the staffing level of a PACE unit that we did in the back of the jail. But I don't know the specific roles is going to better. But if it emulates CAPS and PACE, then it should get better down the road. And that's fairly recently, only a few months ago that we started doing that. But that was the purpose, and I think why we did it. Was there another part of the question? Sorry.
Well,
I didn't know I was
I
going to
could
talk today.
ask for, do you want to speak to this issue, or do you want me to keep going? I mean, I don't. So is it it's two MO units that have an extra day room officer?
To my knowledge, it was lower 5 and 7 and lower 6 and 8.
And so could you speak, both or all of you, to the issue of moving people internally at AMKC between the mental observation units? So my understanding was that patients were moving and then the clinical staff didn't know where they were. There were some very bad incidents that occurred at AMKC that then provoked some changes in this area. So are those changes still standing?
I found out about this a short time ago. We had this problem several years ago when I worked in the MO area, and really it was over the weekend. The two guys would have a fight, and they would just transfer them, and you'd come back, and they know where they were. So what we did is we centralized everything. I don't know if you've been in AMKC, the Hearts Island Clinic. So everything's going to get centralized to that. The weekend is what's really hurting us, because the clinical staff aren't there. But what's pretty cool, in the back of AMKC, there's one CS covers those 2 units. So and everything else is pretty much a program. So except for Mod 11, Mod 12 is a program. Guys are not arbitrarily going to be put into CAPS, PACE, or Mod 11 or Mod 9, which is a substance abuse program. So you're looking at it to fight. And I kind of understand it. For security reasons, we don't know what happened, what started with this fight. But the good thing is there is a CS, and Dr. Ford explained how the rank structure kind of changed, that there's someone overseeing those 2 units in the back of the jail. But I'm assuming that's what the problem was, where guys were in lower 5 and 7 would have a fight, and then you would find them in Mod 11 the next day. And Mod 11's kind of tricky. Most of the new admissions who come into AMKC get filtered through Mod 11. That's like a new, because we don't know what those, some of the guys come in, we don't know them. Unless we do know, like Dr. Ford was talking about that, where they're already, which is sad. Some of these guys we've known for years. But if we don't know them, they'll be assessed in Mod 11. But I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. I really don't. But this is an ongoing problem. Real simple. everything gets coordinated to the Heart-Silent Clinic. So if you come in on a Monday morning, and that's traditionally where the problems were, it was the weekend or the overnight. The next morning you would find it, and it would typically be an inmate fight because you don't want to leave them in the same house. That's just doesn't make sense either. But I'm assuming that's what the problem was.
Just to follow up on that, maybe.
Do you mind?
Yes.
Just to add to what you're talking about, I think, Ms. King, what you're referring to is internal transfers between MOs at AMKC specifically. And one thing I didn't mention in the presentation is that entrance into the MO PACE and CAPS unit is controlled by the mental health service. So it's dictated by an assessment we do and then a form we fill out called a transfer notification form that we give to DOC, and that sort of triggers the cascade of movement. Because AMKC has 9 MO units, and historically transfers between those units were not governed by TNFs, there has been historically a lot of movement between those MOs, and as Acting Warden Gallagher said, sometimes when fights happen or they need to separate individuals. Since we have implemented treatment teams on these MO units, it's more critically important that we try to keep patients on those units as much as safety allows. And so we're working with DOC, particularly at AMKC, because that's largely where the challenge has been, to try to honor those TNFs internally in a more robust kind of way. Does that address it?
Yeah, it addresses it. I just want to say, one, hopefully AMKC now will figure out a way to control weekend actions by the supervisory staff. And I also, there's also a question of who gets to discharge people from these units. You're saying that, Dr. Ford, that you have some control over intake. I'm not sure that you have as much control over discharge. And that's a difficult thing that has to be negotiated, of course. And then the other issue, but very important, for you to control. And then the other part is just back to you, Acting Warden Gallagher, which is why do you have to move people when they fight all the time? Why isn't it not possible to use the rooms that you have in the facility to keep someone out of sight for, not out of sight, but out of activity for a while, and not have movement as the response to all fights?
Well, that's one of the changes that we learned from CAPS. There was a standard practice: 2 guys fight, you have to move them, without even acknowledging what the fight was about. And when we learned it, we stopped doing that in CAPS initially. So it's not standard practice that 2 guys have a fight. If the weekend can't figure out what it is for safety reasons. So we are talking about using TNFs internally. TNFs were only for transfer to another MO house, another jail. And as far as, I'm thinking with discharging, you mean to a GP level of care? That's always been mental health. We don't put a guy in that level of care without mental health. We don't take him out. And that should not be happening. And when I was there, it didn't happen. We don't move anybody out of mental health units without a clearance. That's a transfer notification form, is the form. But we've come a long way in terms of the fights. We are talking about using TNFs internally. Yeah. But it's hard.
Of course.
Everything. I talk a lot about the MO areas, the mental health areas. That black and white thinking, all or nothing, it's all gray. If you have a standard policy that you have to move up fighters, that's not going to work. If you say we'll keep them together, that's not going to work. Every incident has to be looked at individually. That's why it's so difficult to work in this unit. And that's why you have to work with Dr. Ford. That's the key thing. Years ago, we didn't talk to each other. That's the dramatic change. She kind of put in the slides. Now we discuss where this person's going to go. Remember, for years, you have a long time. Oh, security tells where the guys go. No, we don't move a guy in the mental health areas unless we talk with the clinical staff.
So on the evenings and on the weekends, when there isn't the same availability of clinical staff that there are during regular hours, Health and Hospitals has a 24-hour operations division, and there's always an on-call psychologist, psychiatrist, or somebody that if we need to make an emergency move for security reasons, we can call and actually speak to someone that can then review the specific chart, and we can talk about what are the best options, and that might be the opt-in just for that night, and then we may reconvene in the morning and figure out what's the next best plan. But I feel like since they've moved toward this model where there's kind of treatment team response, we have a better system to deal with things in the short term, and then what's the safest and best plan for the long term.
Thank you.
Can you report on how process where y'all was getting together daily to review who was going on specialty clinics. Can you talk about that? Have we seen progress?
So you're referring to kind of our daily huddles. So that is still happening and does definitely drive practice in real time. We've also been looking at other reasons why people don't come to the clinic and what makes sense as far as making sure people get access to those services. So the process is collaborative. We are recognizing that people do refuse in the housing area a lot. So when we see that there's somebody refusing, for example, for mental health services, that warrants a phone call or a follow-up with the clinician, and then we talk about what's the best way to make sure the person gets access to care.
And the numbers is at 16%. I think it was in the 20s when we first started talking, low 20s.
It's definitely improving, and we still have work to do.
Could you speak more to the collaboration and the success you've had with crisis intervention teams? And, you know, Dr. Ford talked about them being embedded in the mental observation units. Maybe you could give some detail around, you know, where it's operating, how many staff have been trained, anything about the increase or decrease in its use and the impact on violence, on safety?
Mm-hmm. So crisis intervention training, we implemented that in 2015. And since implementation, we have crisis intervention team access in 24 different housing areas, representative over 5 jails. What a formal and Acting Warden Gallagher was a part of the original crisis intervention team that started that collaborative training. And the crisis intervention team model has a clinician and an officer responding together to a person that is known to mental health and in a crisis to help de-escalate and help them to kind of resolve whatever the issue is, hopefully without having to use force. So what we found is that the culture at Rikers is changing in that I think we're much more likely to kind of look at a person through a lens of what else might be going on. And I think CIT and the collaboration with Correctional Health Service has been a big part of that. We've done several joint trainings. Dr. Ford talked about prior to opening a PACE or a CAPS unit, there's this joint training that happens with security and clinical staff together. And that's a educational model that we tend to follow, that we tend to implement everywhere. It's even expanded to mental health first aid training, where mental health first aid training is something we've implemented as mandatory training at the academy. But it's really kind of looking at this, what might be other reasons why a person is in crisis and what are ways that we can respond. But specifically about CIT, initially, we were only documenting formal activations, which was when a mental health person went with an officer and de-escalated a person. And what we noticed over time is that we weren't getting as many formal CIT activations documented. And we were trying to figure out why that was happening, because we knew people were using CIT, but we weren't sure why we weren't getting the documentation to support it. So then we started to ask our officers, well, if you feel like you're using your CIT skills, maybe informally, maybe you don't need both a clinician there, but you're using something you learned through your CIT training, could you document that? So then we started tracking both formal and informal CIT activations. So to date, we have about 950 CIT activations in total that have happened across the different housing areas that have CIT, and it is a resource that we're looking to use in a more robust way. Commissioner Brand is always talking about, you know, I give you resources, you have things that you can use, are you using it to really make a difference? And we find that when people do use those CIT skills, it does make an impact in helping de-escalate violence.
So the 950 activations is the formal and informal
Combined.
use of?
Mm-hmm. And we're definitely getting more informal numbers at this point, not as many formal activations.
And why would that be the case? Why wouldn't the complete team respond?
So I'm speculating, but yeah, sure.
When we first envisioned it, we thought we wanted the clinical and the uniform staff. And me and Dr. Waters Anthony from H&H, when we did it, we weren't getting any cards. What was happening is the officers were doing so well at the de-escalation, they didn't need the clinical staff. So they were using the skills we taught them. It was in the really tricky ones. The guy who's psychotic and doesn't want to go to the hospital. The manic episodes. Those are the ones that are going to take some time. You know, I think the longest one we had was in Rosem Singer. Woman, pregnant female, refusing to go to the hospital. Took us 4 hours to get her in the ambulance. And that's what CIT, the de-escalation part, it's not even about reducing use of force. It's safety. Nobody gets hurt. This program was created in 1988. De-escalation is only one aspect of it. We bring people who have a mental illness come in and tell their side of the story. We talk about the stigmas like Dr. Ford was speaking about, the way we look at medical treatment as opposed to mental health. CIT was created in 1988, and they realized, for police, they realized back then that we're really dumping our mentally ill in our jails across the country. The CIT pro, Tom Dart is the sheriff in Cook County, and he's leading this. It's a disservice. And the scary thing I've seen from the consumers who've spoken is it's not just that the mentally ill. In poor communities, the first time a person gets real mental treatment is in a jail. It shouldn't be that way. I can't tell you countless times, first time they ever got any type of real mental health treatment is in a jail. And this is not just a city problem, this is a national problem. Just as I said, I get kind of upset when you peg CIT just at de-escalation. That's kind of the nice part of it. It really talks about the whole criminal justice system. You know, they're here and we have to, ideally, I hear the terms, it's a Band-Aid. It is a Band-Aid. Until the country gets it together, builds hospitals, outpatient, this is the Band-Aid we've come up with, and it's a collaboration. But I'm sorry.
And it's an important intervention that you all are trying, and so very important nationally too. So is there a plan, or has there been some evaluation or looking at the implementation of the program? Is someone independently looking at it? Are you documenting and tracking this so that maybe we could take a look at what's really happening and the results?
I know we have an advisory board, because a traditional crisis intervention team has 3 entities: law enforcement, which is DOC, mental health, which is CHS, and we also have NAMI, the National Alliance of Mental Illness. We use Queens, and actually, she just moved up to Massachusetts. She's helping us, so advisory. We also have legal aid in that advisory board to kind of like watch us. But our results do go to Mock J. We have I want to say 2 weeks. We talk with Mock J, because they funded this program. This came from the city council, and that's why I think Dr. Adams sends her numbers too.
Okay.
I wasn't the numbers person, so.
I have a little bit of an elaboration. So we actually assigned a person to have this specific role of looking at who's being trained in CIT, what's the short-term and the long-term implications of that. One of the things that our preliminary results have yielded is that we have to do a better job of making sure people have access to report closer to where the incident is happening. So there's actually a rollout so that people are able to submit those activation cards right on the housing area where that's happening. That should be executed in the next 30 days. But then we're also looking at providing, so CIT training actually happens every single month in jail, but we also recognize that with new staff and people coming into areas, they may not be familiar with CIT. So we have also started going to roll calls to make sure people are aware. If you haven't had CIT training, please sign up, and also make sure that you're documenting every time you have a formal activation. So we think there's a little bit of a learning curve with new staff, but we are tracking and documenting the effectiveness of the intervention.
Just to add from the CHS side, and also I think to address your question about the formal and informal, when CIT, we conceptualized it in the fall of 2014 and thought that it would be 1 or 2 teams per jail responding to all of the MOs in that jail. And that turned out to be unrealistic because they could not, well, first of all, there were some infrastructure problems, like pagers and cell phones weren't working in terms of a way to contact people. But those numbers of teams were not enough to get to these MOs in time to de-escalate. So that led to challenges doing these sort of formal activations. We have since staffed up significantly, at least on the CHS side and the MOs, such that we now have dedicated staff on all of those units who can be involved with CIT, and on our side at least are mandated to CIT training. I think a big answer to solving some of the challenges we have with CIT is making sure that all the staff, custody, and health on MOs are steady, because they will be your CIT responders who are on the unit and who can respond, in seconds rather than minutes. And I think that's probably an important step that we need to take, and agree also about the assessment. That's an important piece of this.
Just a comment, Dr. Ford. I mean, I brag about the success of the suicide prevention program, but I'm not sure whether the metric of suicides of people who are in the mental health program is the appropriate one. There have been 3 suicides in the past 3 years, in 16, 17, and 18.
I'm not aware of one in 17.
That's how. Well, you're refusing to let us see a medical record, so we have a little difficulty with that. But that is our number. Do you have any idea of the 37% of the mental health referrals at intake were referred in the pre-evaluation program that CHS has set up in the outside of Rikers Island? And also, do you have any insight into the use of psychotropic medications for persons in ESH housing?
Let's see. I think are you referring to the PASU, the pre-arraignment screening unit,
Yes.
for the first part of the question?
Yeah.
And your question is what percentage are referred to mental health from that? I don't have that number off the top of my head. We can get it for you. And then the second, psychotropics
In ESH.
in ESH. They are prescribed. So medication is prescribed for any individual who needs it. And sometimes and wants it. So they are prescribed there. Psychiatric medications are not carry meds, meaning that someone gets the dose and then they take it and that's it. So they're not carrying large amounts of medication in that housing area.
Do you have any sense of whether it's an average number or too much or
An average number
higher
of people
numbers?
who are on medication?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I don't have that number off the top of my head, but also can get it for you.
Okay. Well, we'd like to take a look at that. Thanks.
Just to correct, it was 2 suicides. There was, Dr. Ford's correct, 0 suicides in 2017. 2 in 2016, 1 in 2018. Just
That's
for
what
the
I said.
record.
So 3 over the 3
Yes.
years. Yeah.
Over the 3 years. A question, Acting Warden Gallagher?
Gallagher.
I actually think we should let everybody know why he is now Acting Warden Gallagher. Sorry to interrupt you.
Yes, no.
So I had the pleasure of meeting with him with a lot of DOC staff, Nick Marinacci, about RNDC. If you all recall at the last meeting, I was recounting a number of issues at RNDC. We had a very, very positive meeting. And that's where I was informed that he is now the new acting warden of RNDC and has a very progressive. And I can see you're shying away from the title, but you certainly have the expertise, and we're all really looking forward to working with you. So that's why we are calling you actor.
Thank you.
I'll tell a quick story. When I first joined the board, I did a tour with Gallagher, and there was someone in one of the PACE units. He was being escorted to the clinic, and he started decompensating, and it was like 3 officers that was trying to manage him. And I seen crisis intervention in work. Deb Gallagher knew him, and this is about relationships, Dr. Ford. He knew him, he called him by name, and as soon as he called him by name, he calmed down, and he went and spoke to him. So I'm looking forward to working with you at RNDC. You are crisis intervention.
Thank you.
In
But
the flesh.
that's informal,
Yeah, that is important.
with no documentation.
The question I have.
God.
The question I have is you mentioned a report that goes to Mark J for the CIT intervention. Would we be able to have access to that report? Can we see that report?
I think it's just the numbers. I don't know if it's a figure. I never saw the numbers. I just told everybody. But Rod used
Is
to
there
do
any
that for me.
numbers?
I
Do we
think we
see?
report our numbers. It comes out of Health Affairs and Mark J. Back then it was about the funding.
Okay.
They want to see if they
So
get
if you have any numbers on,
Yes. I'm sorry.
There's a report that Health Affairs generates. We can send it to you.
thank you.
Very good. Any,
One last question for both agencies together. Is there a plan, or do you already collaborate around programming in the mental observation units in particular, not thinking of PACE and CAPS, but how are people occupied during their day? I know that there's one maybe mental health group a day. Is there additional or a plan for additional DOC programming? I don't know if 5 hours is the plan there, or what are your thoughts on that?
This is DC Tausik's purview, so I'm going to let him speak to the programming issue.
Good morning, Board. Once again, Deputy Commissioner Michael Tauzik. Thank you for having me up here today. We're in a continuous process of evaluating our resources, both internally and externally, how to expand services not only in programming, not only in ESH, but also in our mental observation areas. I was just notified yesterday at Rosie's. We're going to be collaborating with CUNY and another university, Fordham University, to go into there and offer theater education by 2 credentialed instructors. And we're continuing to expand in our theater and creative arts area, in the MO areas, as well as increasing as much as possible recreation opportunities to our recreational staff. So little by little, every day, every week, we seem to be making more progress by stretching our resources as much as possible as we evaluate the landscape of how to better situate our staff, not only in the specialized housing areas, but also in some of those areas that are identified by facilities as having high incidences of issues or problematic behavior. So we increase our immersion of managerial staff in those areas. We refigure how we can better utilize our resources. We offer enhanced opportunities for activities for whether it's a week or 2 week or 3 weeks of pro-social compliant behavior. So we're trying to vary a variety of things to try to constantly engage the population and try to get those long stretches of compliant performance by the population.
I know the board has spoken with you a great deal about ESH programming, but I think this is an area we'd really like to learn more about how you intend. I know you have a lot to prioritize, limited resources, but we'd like to learn more about how you intend to strategize, especially around the mental observation units and programming.
Sure, as the doctors were saying, as well as Acting Warden Gallagher, rapport building and relationships are key in this setting. So one of the first things, as you all know, that we did at ESH was that we developed that multidisciplinary team process to evaluate each individual as they came up for reviews. So unlike in the past where it might have been done periodically, routinely now it's just customary, it's practice now where individuals are brought down for reviews. I remember that first day that we started that, there was a lot of apprehension that there would be conflict initially, and there was none. And that really got staff comfortable with that setting. So it's a semi-circular fashion in which the individual is brought in, and then he's able to offer feedback as well to the team in terms of what's not going well, what is going well. He has that unique opportunity to discuss some of the challenges that he may be experiencing, particularly in the SRG world, the Security Risk Group world, and how we can better maneuver him through that system. So if you look at it now, both the population and ourselves recognize that this is a challenge, and it's a challenge for all of us to work on together. So there's actually more of a collaborative effort on it. It's not perfect due to the complexities involved with that, but we're making strides. We look at how many housing units we can open at various levels to accommodate those that we do not see, mostly for the young adults to make sure that they're moving through that process. But we also have a sharp eye as well on the adults, that we have just as an equal obligation to them to move them through the system so they can see that the system is rewarding to a certain extent, at least to be rewarded for pro-social and pro-compliant behavior. Also with our tablet system in ESH, we incorporated podcasts from various individuals from around the country that have stepped away from that lifestyle, a gang lifestyle, and are successful. So we tried to structure it on a series of levels. First, why individuals go into the gang lifestyle, and also at the latter end is almost like a reverse engineering concept to look forward to, that to set expectations for yourself that you can be successful despite what you may be facing on the outside. In terms of what we're doing in general population, it struck me to bring this up, and I'm glad that you asked me to come up in terms of behavioral intervention. So not only is there the mental health component of it, but there's a behavioral health component as well. And so what we're doing, we have 3 jails active right now. where we identify those individuals that are struggling, and it's not just due to incidents, but it can also be just someone just struggling to maintain. And you can identify those through multiple grievances. You can identify that just through word of mouth in the facility with the rapport building, with security staff, as well as program staff. And we're identifying those individuals, and we increase our correctional counseling sessions with that individual. And we try to target the behavior as best as possible through interactive journaling, through other programming to surround that person with various services to try to get that person to move along. So we've had a couple of meetings with H&H and with the doctor on this. Everyone is supportive of the process, and so no, that hasn't been evaluated at this time, but we hope to over time to get it embedded in all the facilities and see how it's working. So I took a slow approach at first with it. It's a new strategy, it's a new methodology for our counseling staff to be that strongly engaged with the population in terms of behavior intervention. So I knew that there was going to be a learning curve for some and a familiarity factor with that in terms of developing strategies to work one-on-one, but we've had some success with that, so I'm happy to report that as well.
That's great. We'd love to follow up with you after the meeting, have maybe a private discussion or a few discussions about the GP work and the mental observation programming work. Sorry, Dr. Ford, were you coming up to say something?
Well, yeah, just from the CHS side, DOC has a really robust array of programming, and we certainly would love to have as much of that as possible for patients in the MO units. So we are in full support of that.
Great.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Progress. Thank you. So, Martha, you want to...
So we're going to go to the next item. Women currently comprise about 6% of the New York City jail population, and the number of women in jail has decreased by 36% since 2013 to about 460 today. That number, I should note, does exclude any trans women who may be housed in male facilities. The city recently announced a number of new initiatives servicing women, dedicated to women in jail, and we've asked the department to update us on these programs.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Thank you for having me today. My name is Annie Penson. I'm the Executive Director for Women's Initiatives, the Department of Correction. I began working with the department in October of 2018, and I'm grateful and excited to share with you an overview of some of the department's ongoing work to improve and expand services for women, especially considering that we're in Women's History Month. After I present, I'll be happy to answer questions related to this important work. I would like to start off by outlining 3 primary reasons that warrant gender-specific services from a selection of national research studies. Reason number 1, promoting mother and child bonds. Many women are the primary caretakers of their children before incarceration and do not always know who will care for their children when they're in custody. Women historically receive fewer visits than men. And almost 2/3 of incarcerated women in the U.S. are mothers. Approximately 60% of women in state prisons have children under 18 years old. Reason number 2, gender-responsive services. Women have distinct programmatic needs and experience incarceration differently than men. Women in custody are more likely to be the victims of domestic abuse or related crime. And 90% of incarcerated women are clinically depressed at some point during their imprisonment, and many of these women's feelings stem from poor relationships with their children. Approximately 83% of the women in prison are there for nonviolent offenses, and the majority of them are drug-related. And reason number 3, support networks.
Is that New York City number? I'm sorry.
That's national.
That's national. Okay.
Support networks. Many women in custody face barriers that prevent them from maintaining family support prior to their incarceration. Some women identify personal shame or other concerns that keep them from wanting visitors, particularly visits from family. research shows that support networks and family connections are a critical factor in successful reentry into the community. In February of 2018, the First Lady of New York City, Charlene McCray, in partnership with the Department of Correction and the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, announced an initiative to address these areas of need that are unique to women. I'll highlight some of this work and other continued efforts by the department towards this shared vision. As it pertains to the needs, the mother-child bonds, in April of 2018, the department launched a first-of-its-kind program entitled Crafting Family Connections, which nurtures positive relationships between incarcerated mothers and their children, excuse me, through monthly off-island visits at the Children's Museum of Manhattan, also known as CMOM. First and foremost, this program is about the vital connection between a mother and her child. We are incredibly grateful to our partners, our officers, and the museum, whose buy-in was essential to the current success of this program. Each visit includes creative arts programming and facilitated family engagement activities. Each participating family receives a free one-year membership to the museum, and the membership is renewed when the mother is released from custody. To date, we've had 9 CMOM visits, with 28 mothers and 50 children participating, with some mothers and their children participating in multiple visits. Today, we are working with the Corrections Department across the country to assist in them implementing similar programs based on our model here in New York City. Beginning in June of 2018, in partnership with the Administration for Children's Services, the department expanded the successful Children of Incarcerated Parents program, also known as CHIP, at Rosie's, which now offers 2-hour visits for mothers with children involved in the child welfare system every Saturday, in addition to every other Tuesday, and includes an expedited visit process for those children. Since June 1st of 2018, we've received over 175 visits from children through CHIP. The department has also invested resources into the physical space at Rosie's. With the creation of a new uniform staff post at Rosie's, mothers are now able to play with their children in the children's area of the Rosie's visit floor. We've also submitted a proposal to the SCOC to create a family visiting area with more family-friendly tables and seating in the visitor space. Regarding the need for gender-responsive services, in addition to my position, which was created as a part of these new standards, the department has hired 3 family engagement specialists who are starting to further develop and implement comprehensive, integrated, and culturally relevant programming and services specifically for women. The department has had a long-standing partnership with Steps to End Family Violence, which provides support services to women who have open criminal cases related to their histories of domestic abuse. In 2017, the department began a partnership with Green Hope Services for Women, which provides support services on and off island to criminal justice-involved women, including a residential alternatives to incarceration program, substance abuse counseling, along with vocational and educational services. In January of 2019, the department expanded its partnership with the Women's Prison Association to expand discharge planning services at Rosie's for women. To highlight some of the existing programs, the department program providers implement the Seeking Safety program, which supports the needs of women with co-occurring trauma and substance abuse disorder. They also offer Beyond Trauma, a gender-responsive curriculum designed to help women recover from the effects of They also offer Beyond Trauma, a gender-responsive curriculum designed to help women recover from the effects of trauma. In order to address gender-specific anger management needs, the women at Rosie's have recently started participating in Beyond Violence, a curriculum designed to serve women in criminal justice settings with history of aggression and/or violence. We're currently working towards implementing additional gender-responsive curricula to address anger management, parenting, substance abuse, and trauma for all women in custody. The department is in process of hiring a director of LGBTQ initiatives who will similarly be working to implement gender-responsive and transgender-responsive programming to transgender women in the department in custody. Upon their release, women are provided the opportunity to engage in ongoing support services through our partnering agencies in the community, such as Green Hope Services for Women, Osborne Association, and Fortune Society. In regards to support networks, in order to promote positive family relationships, our partnering agencies offer Moving On, a program for at-risk women, which provides women alternatives to criminal activity by helping them identify and mobilize personal and community resources. The department is working with the Mayor's Office of Data Analytics to study Rosie's visit process and potential opportunities to expand visit access for women. The department is also in the process of hiring a visit greeter at Rosie's, who will assist visitors in the waiting area and answer any questions they may have regarding the visit process. The department's partnering agencies, like Fortune Society, provide post-release services such as housing, job training and placement, internships, and substance use and mental health treatment. Support in these areas can be critical for women as they work to reestablish connections with family. I'm working closely with the department uniform and non-uniform staff on this work under the supervision of Deputy Commissioner of Programs and Community Partnerships, Michael Tausek. We are also in constant communication with community partners and service providers, and we are always open to their input, as well as input from our visitors and the women in custody. We are also always interested in expanding our volunteer services at Rosie's, and any interested individuals can find more information about volunteer opportunities on the department website. I want to underscore the importance of this work and the department's commitment to continue to build these efforts. We are far from finished, and I acknowledge that there is plenty of hard work ahead, but I believe we are very much on the right track. I'm here to thank you for your partnership and support of our efforts, and I'll do my best to answer any follow-up questions.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. It sounds like some real progress is being made for the women out at Rosie's, and I'm really, really pleased to hear that. So in terms of I know the one time when I had visited, I was just sort of stunned to see that there were women and children in the visiting room, but they weren't allowed to use the play area that was only permitted for ACS children, those children in ACS's custody, when they come to visit. It was my understanding that was going to be changed, and you seem to be reflecting that's the case. So is it the case now that anytime a child comes to visit a mother housed at Rosie's, that mother and child can go into that play area now?
That is correct.
Okay, so that's always granted. I have a question about the nursery. I know I've always really been impressed with the nursery. It is absolutely fabulous, but I've always been disappointed that it seems so underutilized. Mm-hmm. You report here that there were 3 applications for the nursery, but only 1 was admitted, and I know there's a number of issues as to why sometimes the nursery cannot be used. But since it appears to be a given, although correct me if I'm wrong, since it appears to be a given that the nursery is underutilized for incarcerated women and children under the age of 1, has there been any consideration to increasing the age of the children that could be housed there? For example, at Bedford Hills, where women are imprisoned after a sentence, I believe children can be there up to the age of 4. And obviously they have additional services for them. But I'm just concerned that it's so underutilized and so terrific. And maybe it could benefit other women and children if the age was increased to 2, but perhaps there's reasons that can't be done. Hi, good morning.
Good morning. That's something that we can take a look at. I'm not sure about the legal implications, and I would want to talk with folks here at the department and with ACS to find out what, if any, obstacles are in the way or not in the way. So,
Okay.
Let's just make sure that we look both at legal and overall child well-being.
absolutely.
Were there only 3 applications made or only 3 applications approved?
There were 3 applications made, I believe was mentioned, and 1 application was
Three
approved.
That
applications
citizens
were approved.
Approved, that's what I wanted to know.
But only one actually realized it.
How many were presented to you?
That I cannot speak to.
You can't tell us how many applications you received?
That I can't speak, that I cannot speak to.
You just don't have.
We can get you that information.
I would be very, I mean, if you could find it now, it would be helpful because that's a problem historically with the nursery.
Can you talk to the work that you and your staff are doing to increase visits? I know what you're doing with children, but what about just the family overall? Because it is sort of a really sad sight. You go to a men's facility and it's filled with women visiting men.
Mm-hmm.
You go to a women's facility and it's the grandmother or the mother and not many people are there. What are you doing to engage the family so that the family ties are strengthened while the woman is incarcerated?
Right. So I think that first starts with the woman, and like I mentioned in some of the programming that we're offering, and just having conversations with women about what are some of the barriers in having family relationships with them, and starting there, and then maybe starting to engage the families.
If I may, so I'm excited to hear about all of this. I'm also curious about how we determine the effectiveness of these programs. And I'm curious and I am concerned less because I don't believe in the effectiveness of these programs, very much to the contrary, but rather because when we engage in this type of work where we're moving beyond safety and we're trying to improve well-being and we're trying to improve experience for child and mother and family, these are the types of programs that people look at and they say, how do we know it's really effective and are we wasting taxpayer dollars? Mm-hmm. That's not my opinion, but I think it's something we need to be concerned about. I mean, you mentioned the Thrive initiative as it concerns the Children's Museum of Manhattan, and we see what's happening presently concerning the Thrive NYC initiative on the whole. How are you capturing the experience? Are you looking at how to capture it qualitatively as well as quantitatively, the outcomes?
So one thing that has happened most recently is we had a major media outlet who covered the Children's Museum of Manhattan visit, and I think that's a great opportunity.
I was there with you.
I think that's a great opportunity to get the word out about the effectiveness of programs in a qualitative sense. In a quantitative sense, these initiatives are still very new. So in terms of being able to capture numbers, that's going to take a bit of time.
And what I'm encouraging you is that I think very often we don't think about how to capture the qualitative.
Mm-hmm.
And these types of programs, it's very often difficult to capture the quantitative outcomes.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that you need to do some work on the early phase to figure out what are the pre and the post. How do you measure that? How do you capture voice?
Hello again. Excellent points. We have 2 evaluations ongoing right now in 2 other facilities, one with the young adults, as you know, through Vera. Mm-hmm. And we do intend on moving forward, particularly in Rosie's, in terms of evaluating other programs that are ongoing. So step-by-step process. I have a strategic planning team that's part of my group, and that will be on our radar.
Anyone else? Questions, comments?
Just a huge thank you.
Thanks very much.
I actually do have a question. I have a question about housing according to gender identity. Exactly where is the Department of Correction right now with respect to housing by gender identity, that being trans women as well as trans men?
Yes, we are housing individuals consistent with their gender identity.
And how is that determination being made?
That determination, there are individualized determinations made in compliance with the PREA standards and with the Board of Corrections minimum standards.
And for trans women, if they're placed at Rosie's, do they necessarily have to be in the transgender housing unit, or can they be in other housing units if they don't wish to be housed in the transgender unit?
My understanding is that if that the transgender housing unit is a voluntary unit, so if someone is not electing or choosing to go into that unit, they are not required to go into that unit.
And so how many trans women do we have currently housed at Rosie's that are not in the transgender unit?
I don't have the answer to that question. The person who is in charge of the PREA, who is our PREA coordinator, our Assistant Commissioner Yolardi, is not here today, but we can certainly get you any information that you request. We can always follow up and provide that information to the board after today's meeting.
Okay, and I understand the department has not yet finalized the policy for the transgender housing unit at Rosie's, is that correct?
The policy is still in draft form and is still being worked on, and it's still under development, but we are in practice basically following many of the terms that are in the policy, but it's in progress and it's close to being final.
Thank you.
You know, we haven't spent any time today talking about the future in terms of closing Rikers, and I know there's a critical issue in discussion about whether the women's facility will be, whether there will be a women's facility, whether there will be a separate women's facility, whether women will be housed at multiple facilities. But my question is, what could you do? This is not a criticism of what you're not doing, but what could the department do? What could we do? To make that number as small as possible? What can we do to make it so you don't even need an institution?
I cannot speak to that, but that is something that I think we can get back to you on. Well, I mean, in terms of what we can do for women?
Yeah, no, yeah, you're projecting, you know, as of today, you've projected in some form the number of women who will be in jail in 2025.
Right.
You have some number there.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any way to make that number smaller? Is there some way of thinking about this or of engaging other parts of the world to just?
Yeah.
Because I think the 5,000 number is a problem for New York right now, and we have to get lower.
Well, as you know, Dr. Cohen, in connection with MOCJ, the city has been engaged in aggressive efforts to reduce the population through a myriad of reforms, including reforms that coordinate with the district attorney's offices, the courts. We have a package of reform efforts that we're pursuing in Albany during this legislative session. The Department of Correction has participated on operational reforms. Chief Jennings has, I believe, spoken before about the court production efforts, the coordination with the Office of Court Administration to make sure that people who have to be in our custody, that their cases move forward more quickly. Our partnership with the Bronx District Attorney's Office is strong, and with the Rikers Bureau on Rikers Island. And so there's a myriad of efforts that the city and the department are all actively engaged in. I think the Department of Correction, we support all of those efforts at deferring people from ever even entering our custody. We have bail reform efforts to get people out of custody as soon as they, are remanded to custody if they're able to pay their bail or to have online bail and have other family members or friends pay bail. And so there's a whole host of efforts, all of which we support. And the women certainly have been significantly impacted in their population reduction because of that, and we expect it to continue.
Yeah, I was just asking. I know you're doing all that work, and it's very important. I was just wondering specifically around women, what more can be done than what
Bobby,
you're currently doing?
You've opened the door, and I'm just going to jump right in and say that this is not just a justice issue. This is how the city addresses the overall intersection of poverty and race and gender and justice involvement. And it's something that a lot of us are paying close attention to, as well as the city. Stanley and I have been working on this issue as well. So if we really want to talk about how we reduce justice involvement, not just for women, for young persons and for men, then we need to be looking at it increasingly through how do we do a better job of fighting poverty in this city. You open the door. All right.
Thank you.
Also, just so the board also knows that internally we're looking at implementing an assessment tool as well to better understand of our female population on an individual basis, and then correlating that with more targeted programming as well. So whether it's trauma-informed, relationship building, we're hoping that as we move forward with an assessment, that we'll have a much clearer picture of the demographics and criminogenic risk of our population. We're also getting a clearer idea on dependence with our justice-involved women, how many dependents they have, age range, and things like that. So we're building on a couple of things. So hopefully their time spent with us will have an impact in reducing that number moving forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. We now go to the public comment period. Thanks very much. So as you know, each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. iPad on the stage will tell you the time left. In addition to or instead of your oral testimony, we're happy to receive written comment. We also take phone calls, letters, emails, the website, form submissions, or drop-ins to our office at 1 Center Street. So today we have 4 speakers. The first is Valentina Morales.
Good morning. I direct a project called program called the Women's Project. It's an alternative to pretrial detention program for women who do not qualify for supervised release or charitable bail. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about some of the things that make our work incredibly difficult, that I think if we could work out something that is remedied with respect to what happens before women get to us, it would help us significantly in connecting women to services. The primary focus of my comments today are captain's releases from the courthouse. So we wait for women to be released that are ordered released at court. There are times where women have to be released from the Department of Corrections as opposed to walking out of the courtroom. We currently operate in Brooklyn and Manhattan and Queens. On average, we wait about 4 hours for women to be released. Just so that you understand some of the complications that creates for myself and my staff, aside from them having to wait that time where they really can't do much else, is that often if we are taking women, for instance, to inpatient substance use treatment programs, they have a limit around 4 o'clock for intake. If we miss that, and we're in constant communication to kind of see if that can be more negotiable or push it back. But if we miss that cutoff, then we miss a night in that inpatient treatment program, which is at times mandated by the court, and otherwise have nowhere for that woman to go with the exception of going into the shelter system. We often spend a good amount of time and we coordinate very much with correctional health services, and I have to say they have some really incredible social workers doing discharge planning who collaborate with us to put into place kind of plans that we pick up on and we use in terms of our presentation to the court, and then in connecting women to services. And some of these small issues create a huge obstacle for us in making those connections initially. Something else that impacts us is the amount of time it takes to pay bail. So we often pay dollar bail for women who have multiple cases. We find that it's very unpredictable, can take hours. Sometimes the answers that we're given are the fax machine doesn't work. I need to say that when I call the Department of Corrections, they are very responsive. When I call correctional health, they are incredibly responsive in individual cases. But with respect to captain's releases and with respect to the payment of bail. I think we need something more structured that is just in existence for every single case, because I'm an advocate. I have access to higher level individuals. Most people paying bail or family members waiting for people to release don't have that same access. And so I'd ask that some thought be given to that, and also to an increase in interagency and cross-agency communication. So there are times where, you know, something that, let's say was a civil commit order, and if I could just have 60 seconds more of your time, a civil commit order, let's say, out of correctional health that was since discontinued, and that information didn't get to the Department of Corrections necessarily. Again, we've been able to call and kind of connect to those two agencies, but I've been surprised that there are times I have phone numbers that they don't have. And so I think efforts toward enhancing communication is really great. And then the last thing I want to say is I've been here before in another capacity to advocate for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, and I really want to congratulate and thank Correctional Health Services for the work that they are doing and have done. Just in terms of trying to quantify that population, there really is no other jail, I think, in the country that's doing this work necessarily in the way that they're doing it, in a very thoughtful way, and really thinking about, you know, either treatment or just something to address the needs of that very vulnerable population. So I do have to say thank you and really give credit where it's due. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. The next speaker is Brittany Cooper.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Brittany Cooper, and I'm a social work intern from Brooklyn Defender Services. And I'm sharing a written testimony by a man who was held in solitary confinement at GRVC. So I just want to let you know what his story was in solitary. Being in the box is the most inconvenient part of doing a bid. You know you're doomed once you make it to seg intake. This is where they downsize your property and confiscate all of your food and hygiene products. Your entire commissary is either thrown out or given to the intake worker who is an inmate. From there, you get your tan uniform taken from you and given an orange one instead. Then you're rear cuffed and escorted to one of the housing areas. Every single cell is completely covered in graffiti and dirt. The inside of the toilets are dark brown or green. The vents are completely covered in dust. You're not giving any cleaning products, so you're pretty much stuck in filth during your stay in the box. Usually every meal that is served is cold or lukewarm. I've been in the box over 10 times throughout my incarceration, and I can't recall ever having a hot meal. You're only allowed 1 6-minute call a day, and you can only call 2 numbers. They have to be on your approved phone list, and that's only if you can get to the phone. There are 2 phones, one for the top tier and one for the bottom tier. So if an inmate gets to the phone and refuses to give it back, no one else on that tier can use the phone until he decides to give it back. Therefore, you can go days without getting on the phone. You are only allowed showers every other day of the week. Showers are closed on the weekends. Sometimes when the officers are being unresponsive, you can go 4 to 5 days without showering. The yard is also a single-man cage. When the yard officers walk the housing area to make the yard list, they walk at 4:30 a.m. because they don't want anyone to know they are walking. So if you want to go outside, you have to stand on your gate in the morning. If you alert anyone else that the yard officers are making their list, they will take your name off the list. There is no water or bathroom available in the yard either. The box has physically and mentally broken me down. No one provides any reading material, so you're stuck reading the walls in your cell. On plenty of occasions, I've talked to myself to get through the day. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Kenneth Harris. Albert Craig.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It was a couple of meetings ago that you guys put out some statistics about underreporting
And I think the number was something astronomical, like 80% underreported. And the department got up here and said, okay, essentially, it won't happen again. And you said moving forward, and everybody was good with that. I don't think you have the ability to just shove that to the side and move forward. We've consistently talked about injury. In fact, on my way in here, I heard one of you say how concerned you were about these injuries, right? That's what I constantly hear, that you're concerned, but you tend not to do anything. I don't think you have the authority to just brush aside the fact that they've put out something that was, I believe the number was 80% inaccuracies that your report said, and just go and say, well, let's start from now. I don't think that's easy, or you should have that authority. I believe that DOI, I believe the city council, I believe somebody should step in and understand that people are getting hurt. When the commissioner took her position, she was on the news and she said, my #1 priority is to close Rikers Island, move forward with the mayor's plan to close Rikers Island. Officers and inmates are getting hurt by the thousands since then. And nobody seems to address this. You keep talking about your concern for our injury and our safety, and it's not right, and something has to be done. I seen the look on your face just now when you heard that an inmate did not take a shower for a couple of days. Imagine what it feels like when your face is cut or you've been stabbed. I don't see that level of concern with anybody in this damn room. I see no concern. If I keep coming up here asking for some concern, why aren't you concerned? Why aren't the advocates concerned? Why isn't the department concerned? The reason why you're not concerned, because you have to keep that narrative going of culture of violence in order to move forward with closing Rikers Island. If there is no violence, then you have no reason to close it. So once again, you're sacrificing officers and you're sacrificing inmates so that you can move forward with this. I've come up here and said they're doing this blended thing, shoving these, you keep saying you have concern for inmates, and they're shoving them into these housing areas and they're getting hurt. But you really don't have any concern because we can sacrifice for the better good of closing Rikers Island until somebody's baby gets stabbed to death. And then you'll be up here talking about how concerned you are. You don't give a damn. They don't give a damn. Nobody in this room cares what's happening to these people, both officers and inmates. I have never come up here and just talked about officers. I continually talk about inmates, and you don't care. I mean, like, are you that concerned about a shower, but not concerned about somebody getting killed? I mean, like, where's the morality here? Is there anywhere in this room, can we do something about this? I know you don't have the authority just to brush aside the fact that they've actually did such a bad job with their injury reports. I know you don't. And did you forward it to anybody? Did you forward it to the city council? I'm going to reach out to city council members and ask that hearings are done. You people, I don't understand you. You claim to be decent people. I think some of you are, but it should make you angry that people are getting hurt and nobody's doing a damn thing about it. So I'm going to scream and yell to as many city council people, the governor's office. I'm going to write to the attorney general. I'm going to anybody that'll listen, because this room does not care.
Thank you, Mr. Craig. Is there a Kenneth Morrison? Well, I tried Harrison and Morrison, so I can't read the last name. If you're signed up, then with the first name Kenneth. Nope? Okay. I think that does it for the public hearing. We're going to adjourn. The next meeting is on April 23rd. It's not a regular meeting. It's a meeting, a public hearing to discuss board standards on preventing sexual abuse and sexual harassment. We're adjourned to that day. Thank you.
I would encourage you not to respond to his